Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets continue their inconsistent play in the absence of Kevin Durant, falling to the Detroit Pistons at home. We break down how there was a beautiful performance from Kyrie Irving and Nicholas Claxton, even a kick-in from one Edmund Sumner, but just nothing else. The frustration and the lack of focus from this team, even on a back-to-back, is unacceptable. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day, even after the losses. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel and even on YouTube. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And Doug stumbling out of the gates because that's what the Brooklyn Nets did against the Detroit Pistons. We're going to dive into Kyrie Irving specifically and what he's trying to do without Kevin Durant, and the fact that this team just got no support tonight. It's back-to-back. It was just brutal, man. Brutal from the tip. We all knew this was coming from about the first 5 seconds of this game.
Absolutely no excuse. I mean, Detroit stinks. I know this is a professional basketball team, and you got to be up for every single game, and this is the problem here. And it's on the back-to-back, and you can make a million excuses. No Kevin Durant, yada yada. Seth Curry out of the game as they probably try to just it was knee soreness, but it's probably just more management. So you can come up with a whole narrative about what happened here and why it happened. In the end, this is the Pistons. The Nets are still a quality basketball team without even their best player.
Allegedly.
And this is not at home, and this is just not a game you can lose. They have to bank wins. Every opportunity they have without Kevin Durant on the court, they have to bank every possible win because they to avoid a repeat of what happened last year where they dipped in the standings when Durant wasn't around. It hasn't been as bad as it was last season, but it hasn't been great. I know they had the back-to-back wins and our spirits were buoyed a little bit. And we tried to, positive our way through the Sixers game because they put up a good fight against a full-strength Sixers team. An L is still an L, and that's all it shows up in the box score in the standings. But this game, I mean, the Pistons are just not a good team. And the Nets the Pistons are the 27th ranked offense in the offensive efficiency in the season. They had 101 points in the end of the third quarter. Like, what is going on? It was just a bottom feeding performance from nearly everybody on the court, save Kyrie, save Claxton, and save Sumner. After that, it was about as bad as you get from everybody else. We'll go through the positives. I can't even believe it. Those guys were so good though, that you have to actually talk about them in a positive fashion, which we will. But on a whole, to lose this game is super deflating, even when you come up with all the narratives around why it could have happened.
Oh, yeah. It's bad play for the most part across the board here. It's bad performances from Royce O'Neal, from Joe Harris. And then you compound all of this. By the way, Ben Simmons didn't look like he had anything to give in this game prior to going out with apparent knee soreness. We'll check in on what that could mean long term. We've seen him miss a couple stretches of games here. Then you have TJ Warren. He goes down with an apparent ankle injury. You already mentioned probably just management, but no Seth Curry in this game. So there's nothing better than having it like one of the worst performances this season by the team collectively be compounded by the fact that you could also maybe in the short term start to be with some of these guys. Now, on the one hand, you say TJ Warren hasn't necessarily looked so stellar of late, but the Nets can't really afford to lose players here. And the Ben Simmons piece that I wanted to touch into, because I think there's plenty of things we say at a high level about what they didn't do well in this game, switching, defensive closeouts, rebounding. There's plenty of things to point to. But the interesting thing that I realized about Ben Simmons, because we talked about this a handful of times when it comes to his back and thinking about that injury, but a handful of times throughout the season now, it's been knee soreness. It's kept him out of games. He's missed a couple. He's also left games with it. So I went over, Doug, and I'm no doctor. We always like to give that caveat before making these statements. But The muscles around your knees are powered by the nerves that originate in your lower spine. Irritation or compression of these nerves at their spinal origin causes symptoms commonly known as sciatica, which may include knee pain and or weakness. There's other things that I went through here just talking about how those nerves travel right down the back, through the hips, the buttocks, and then down to each of the knees. So like the other part of this thing, and it isn't an excuse making, it's just reality about Ben Simmons, is that if he is still dealing with something in the recovery of the back, and it does extend down to his legs, and we're already at past the midway point of the season, this is just season-long reality. And I don't know if it's, chicken or the egg here. Did he check out because it wasn't a good game for him and there's a bit of a built-in excuse around the back and the knees, or did that actually flare up, and that's going to make it really difficult over this stretch without Kevin Durant to rely on him already having the inconsistencies that we're trying to see him play through?
Yeah, I'm always going to give players the benefit of the doubt when it comes to injury. Yeah. So I think that I'm not really going to go there on that one. But in terms of just like what it means for the team, it really was indicative of sort of like what happened here on a high level with this team. Like when nothing's going right, it seems like everything's going wrong, right? And like they're able to couple together big performances from a couple of the guys, but you lose Simmons, you lose Warren, you're already without Curry and Durant. I mean, there is a point at which there's a breaking point around the talent, in terms of like what you're gonna be able to do. And maybe we'll get into like the Simmons conundrum here later in the podcast and maybe even later next week. Cause I agree with you that this is not going anywhere. This is going to probably be either a season-long thing or at least a season-long sweat around like whether the injury piece is going to rear its ugly head. Even with the Simmons thing, like Detroit's 13-30 on the season. I gave them too much credit. They're 13-37 on the season. It's the second worst record in the NBA. And I don't know if the Nets, like, to a man, at least early, right? They had to dig themselves out of a hole. And so so the game probably even appears closer than it was. Like, I don't even actually think it was this close in terms of where the score was. But like, to a man, they just seemed like they were sleepwalking from the beginning. I agree with you. Like, as Simmons laughed, I thought it got poked in the eye, but it ended up being his knee. Like, it was confusing about what was happening, but it's sort of indicative, at least for the first 3 quarters of this game, of like what was happening with this team. It was like either you were checked out or it looked horrible or they were hurt. Like, I don't know. It was just like everyone, at least for most of the game, fell into one of those 3 categories until late. And they stormed back late. And we'll talk about some of the efficiency numbers from at least 3 of these guys. But yeah, the Simmons thing coupled with this other sort of general malaise, like, I don't know what you expect to end up happening. It's just a total F. It's weird because like I want to give 3 of these guys A's, and everyone else was so bad that it's just such an F- from everybody else that it just ends up becoming just like this. On one hand, weird to evaluate, and then on the other hand, not that hard to evaluate. It's just a brutal loss.
Well, and knowing, because we want to talk positively about Kyrie Irving, Nicholas Claxton, Edmund Sumner, and just their individual performances. Like you said, as bad as it was, there are guys that were trying to do all of the right things to help them possibly win this game. So I'll just throw the quick tip of the hat to one Markieff Morris. If you're talking about shooting into an ocean, this guy is standing on the beach facing towards dry land. Because and it's not even a knock on him, because you're asking guys to step up and have some bigger games or whatever, but he's been bad from deep all season long. He looks like he has lost whatever step that he had. And this is like, that's the layer deeper here. When Ben Simmons goes out with the injury, you look to the bench. There's no Day'Ron Sharpe available in this game. They go to Yuta Watanabe a little bit, and then you try to use some Markieff Morris minutes because you need something. And it was interesting. Maybe we'll touch on this a little bit deeper too, that you did have like Jacques Vaughn looked like he was going to go deep into the bench in this game. Then some of the injuries hit early, and he tried to shrink it down. And I think it's the combination of understanding who you have available and who can be effective. And then I think like Jacques Vaughn was trying to find a way to get this win. Like, it wasn't, hey, some things aren't going our way here, lick our wounds back to back. Like, the Nets understand they need to win these games, not even very winnable, a borderline must-win game based on the opponent. And knowing you don't have Kevin Durant, and the record is looking worse and worse without him. They're now 2-6. So like, you need to get this game. I think he coached to try to get there. The problem was none of the performances were enough, excluding those 3 players that we'll get into next.
All right. We're going to get into more of this later. This is, again, a very, very weird game to end up talking about, but we're going to break into some of the positives. and have to go through some of the negatives as well. But first, going to talk to you about our friends over at LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Maybe the Nets can go over to LinkedIn Jobs, see if we can find maybe a floor spacer that can come in, maybe handle the rock a little bit. That's one of the qualified candidates the Nets might be wanting to look for around the trade deadline or just when they're doing their own hiring. That's what LinkedIn does. They match you efficiently with roles and people who have the skills, values, and experience to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools that go beyond the resume data by using insight from the job post. Going to match you with up to, or they're going to comb the 875 million members, and then they're going to match you with the very best. Huge player pool, and they're going to drill it down to find you the people that you need. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
All right. So we compartmentalized some of the bad. Let's talk about some of the good. This is a game where the Brooklyn Nets shot 45.7% from the field. It's a little bit glossy based on a couple of individual performances, obviously starting with one Kyrie Irving, 5 straight games with over 30 points for Kyrie. He's now second all time on the Nets. He already was 14 games with 40 or more points, only behind Vince Carter, just ahead of Kevin Durant with 10. All of these great accolades that we can put at the feet of Kyrie Irving. And unfortunately, it's the lack of the supporting cast that made another really good and efficient performance from Kyrie Irving not matter.
Yeah, look, names will be an all-star starter this for this year. Before the game tipped, he and Kevin Durant both named starters for the All-Star game. Go ahead and I'll break down some of the numbers here.
Only the third time in Nets franchise history they've had 2 players named to the All-Star game together, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving previously, and then Coleman and Anderson going way back to early Nets days. So the Nets, again, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant setting records throughout this franchise. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you come in on like a good note. And look, Kyrie, 27 points this season, a little bit under what his overall career efficiency is. Or excuse me, he's down from the 50, 40, 90 season. There's a chance he can get back there. He's like 49, 37, and 90 right now. It's going to take some efficiency. It's going to be probably tough with Kevin Durant out. But if he plays like this, this kind of efficiency from him tonight, you cannot lay the rest, or you cannot lay the loss at his feet here. I mean, 40 points on 27 shots with only getting to the line 7 times is hyper efficient. I mean, that's a true shooting in the 70% range. You know, we talked at times about like what the team can be if Kyrie is their best player. In this kind of performance, the volume was there, but you'll take this volume all day at this kind of efficiency, right? And so you can't. This is actually what makes the loss even worse is that you get a 40-point game with Kyrie actually pretty efficient and playing pretty well and still lose. That's a really tough pill to swallow. And often with these games and often with these losses, this is where it gets confusing because you will almost always a loss to the Pistons like this would have meant Kyrie played bad, right? This is just where you'll end up being with a team constructed the way it is. If Kyrie plays really bad, they actually will struggle to win at times without Durant, no Curry, because you're like, okay, where's the scoring going to come from? Yeah. For him to actually dial it up and get there on the back-to-back and bring it in this game and lose, and we'll get to Claxton and Sumner here in a second, but that makes the loss actually, frankly, even worse because that means, hey, you actually got a great game from him on the back-to-back, and he was super efficient, and it wasn't hero ball. It was just actually Kyrie in his bag, scoring sort of at will, and you still kind of lost by a lot. That sucks. And it just makes it, the loss is always going to be bad. Sometimes it's not as bad if just everyone plays bad, but when your superstar plays well and you still get waxed, one, you actually begin starting to scratch your head a little bit because it actually kind of starts not making any sense.
Well, and that's not the funny thing, but we'll go back to the Philly game when we talked about it on the post game there. Only 15 shot attempts from Kyrie, incredibly efficient. It wasn't about knocking his game. It was the thing where you go, God, take 5 more, Kyrie. Maybe it gets us over the hump. This is that game against a much worse team than the Philadelphia 76ers, where you go, Kyrie, man, you should be able to get yours in this game. And he does it. 14 of 27 from the field, 6 of 12, 50% from beyond the arc in this game. And then all you need from there is the supporting cast to serve their role. And the irony, and I know you're gonna highlight the collective stat line here for these guys is you get another great performance from Nicholas Claxton, 11 to 13 from the field, 27 points on the night. His game log, by the way, is looking strikingly similar alongside Kyrie Irving over these last handful of games. He's been in double digits for the last 7. He's been 20 or more in the last 5 straight, and he's only continuing to score more and more here. Also got to the line tonight and knocked down 5 of 7 free throws. So you got everything that you wanted from Nicholas Claxton. And you even got a pitch in from Edmund Sumner. And then zeros, duds, not literal zeros, but duds across the board from every key possible contributor, from Royce O'Neal to Joe Harris. It was just TJ Warren, even before he went down with the ankle. It was brutal in every other way from this roster. It was brutal.
Since Durant went out, Claxton is now averaging 21 points and 11 rebounds on 34 minutes a game since Durant went out. Like, he's done every single thing you've wanted and more, to the point where I was actually going to even ask tonight, like, where does he rank? Forget about defensive player of the year. Like, where does he rank in the league just of centers? Like, you got to start to probably have the conversation about where that rank is. Like, I didn't even break it down yet. Maybe we'll
those old top 100 lists that we looked at the start of the year and stuff. Like, I don't,
he's skyrocketing.
That's what I mean. Go back and look at those lists. Who are we climbing over top of now? Yeah.
So to couple with what I said before, so you get the Kyrie game, which is, again, hyper efficient scoring. Then you get Claxton, who also can't miss, like, only raises his field goal percentage on the season, which he was already leading the league in. He actually makes his free throws, goes 5 of 7, right? Like, making the free throws. And so now you're like, okay, we got 67. So if you looked at this box, this is the nuts thing. If you looked at this box score right after the game, you didn't watch the game at all, you don't know how the game ended. You saw only these two things. You're like, okay, 38 minutes from Kyrie, 33 minutes from Claxton, 67 points combined. They barely missed a shot. You like, how much money would you put that the Nets crush the Pistons? Like, if you weren't able to see the other things, you'd be like, what are they, minus 5,000 for the win? Like, I don't even know. Like, it's some crazy bananas number if you just saw these two numbers together. When we get to Sumner, like, if you saw these 3 numbers, you're like, they won by 40. And I'd only be confused. I'm like, well, say they must have won by 40, but why did Kyrie play 38 minutes? That'd be the only question I had if I looked at these other numbers.
Where's Cam Thomas playing 15 minutes, obviously, and closing out the bulk of this game?
Okay, yeah, I was like, I don't even need to see what everyone else did, because they wouldn't have had to do anything for them to win, and that's where it becomes even just sort of like this is so mind-boggling. So it's been the theme of this episode from the beginning. We'll just throw Sumner in now, because then we can lament for this last piece about like where we have. If you add the last piece in, where you get 24 points from Sumner on 7 of 10 shooting. Now you combine these guys, 91 points, 76% true shooting percentage for the game. That's as efficient as it gets. 3 players combined for 91 points and basically can't miss. When you do this, it's impossible to lose. It's impossible to lose. Like, so little needs to happen from everybody else to take these 3 games and combine them into a loss. It's nauseating. And I can see why Nets fans, and if you just do one quick, and I'm going to get off this net starting after this sentence, you can see why this kind of loss would tilt Nets fans so bad, because you just can't get great games like these from guys and just lose. Like, it's just such an indictment on everybody else. They'll go down the list. Every other guy that I did not mention in those 3 guys sucked. And like, that's how you lose.
Well, and by the way, all 5 starters for Detroit were in double digits. 3 more players off the bench in just in a 4-man deep rotation. All were in double digits as well. We're going to talk about one of those players coming up here in the segment, because I think what you're seeing here is, we know the Nets need to probably add something at the deadline, but even beyond that, a performance like this from Kyrie Irving, a performance like this from Claxton and Sumner, it means without Kevin Durant, you need a 4th guy to be performing at a very high level for the Brooklyn Nets to be winning basketball games. We'll continue to lament this loss coming up in a second.
All right, I'm going to make myself feel better, because I'm going to talk about our friends over at FanDuel, the new official sports betting partner for the Locked On Podcast Network. They're the #1 sportsbook in America. That's FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports super fun, very easy. New customers right now, they can join today. You can join today if you're out there. Get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I'm making myself feel better already here. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel is all your favorite bets from the money line, point spreads, those player pops. You get the same game parlay. I love the same game parlay. I'm in there at really kind of every contest, definitely with the Nets. Not going to tell you what I did same game parlay with the Nets tonight. It involved over on the points for a couple guys that I'm just about to absolutely scream about here in a second. So thanks for nothing, Royce O'Neal. Thanks for nothing, Joe Harris. But FanDuel has just got you going. You want to head into NFL Sunday playoffs here, -2.5 for the Eagles. I was, if you've been listening to the rest of this week, I'm +2.5 on the San Francisco. I can't even think about what's happening with the Eagles right now. +2.5 over at FanDuel. FanDuel's got you covered for everything you want and more. Football fans, basketball fans too. Don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All righty. So, I do want to touch on one of these players that we mentioned there from Detroit. But you said there, guys that came up short in a big way, and we don't need to overstate this. It's weird.
It's literally impossible to overstate it because they were so bad, but keep going.
Yeah, right. Well, so here's a couple of quick things. And then I do want to get to something specifically about how this team needs to improve and tie into an episode that I had done the other day when Naz Reid's name came up for the Brooklyn Nets as a potential target. Royce O'Neal, who shot, he was in the starting lineup. I forgot. That's how easy it was. That's how forgettable it was. I forgot he's in the starting lineup. 29 minutes, 1 of 7, 1 of 5 from deep. Not happening for him. Now, I did remember they highlighted a stat in the 76ers game where in the final 3 minutes this season, Royce O'Neal he's been 4 for 4 in like clutch within certain possessions. Only him and Kyrie and Kevin Durant have been efficient in the critical moments when you're down a stretching game. So he has it in him. But what he also has in him is just running cold. And when he's running cold, I'm not going to say that his defensive game is not good enough to carry what he doesn't give you offensively, but his defensive game is not good enough to carry what he doesn't do offensively, especially when you don't have Kyrie Irving out there, right? So his game pretty brutal. Now, if you think that he doesn't do enough defensively for me when he's not playing good on offense, imagine how I feel about Joe Harris in this game. And we've said, like, we are the go to bat for Joe Harris. It comes back to the average. But what has been different this year is he is going on 4-game hot streak, 4-game loser streak, 3 games looking pretty good, 2 games looking like an absolute nightmare. Fouled out the night before, looked brutal in this game, took a lot of bad fouls. He had the leak out pass from Kyrie late where he had the layup and got absolutely destroyed by Bogdanovich, which is brutal. It was the most unathletic combination of players on the court, and he got
dying. I'm going to stop you real quick about that. I'm dying laughing because that play summed up the whole game to me. Like, in the moment, I was like, that sums up the whole thing. Right when that happened, I was like, there's no chance they're winning. And if you weren't watching the end of this game, it was a fast break where Harris is 2 steps ahead of the closest defender in what looks like is going to be the easiest layup of all time. And he gets blocked the way that I would block my kid if, like, who's 4'7", if she was going up for a shot, if I was just looking to, like, just totally demoralize her, because he gets blocked. Well, he gets basically blocked back to half court off the backboard. And then he falls down because his momentum takes him in the thing. And I was like, and if you're rooting for the Joe Harris points over, you really were watching that one very closely because so it was a combo deal of everything. But that play, among all things, I thought summed up the game perfectly for both Harris and the Nets in general. But sorry to cut you off, but I was just dying laughing because it was like it was so bad that it was comical.
Yeah, and I already talked about Morris. I don't have high expectations for him. Watanabe had what you would call like pretty good game for him by what you want from him. 2 of 5, and he gets to the line a few times, has the rebounds. He's +8, which is pretty impressive in a game when you lose by 8. So I mean, but like it just brutal from all of these key categories. Unless you have something else that you want to really lament about how bad this was. Actually, no, you had the numbers up about what the rest of the team did, right? Everybody else outside of those 3, how did they perform from a shooting performance? Just to make sure that you take down that over 70 true efficiency shooting percentage from Sumner, Kyrie, and Clax.
Yeah, so the first 3 guys had 91 points, and the rest of the group had 31 points total on 11 for 44 shooting. So shooting 25% from the field, not from 3, from the field, shooting 25%. They scored 31 total points. No one can make anything. The true shooting was like in the 40s. It's just there's not much more to say about it except that this is what I mean about when you get a bottom feeding performance. And look, some of these guys, the Royce O'Neal, from a shooting perspective, has definitely gone pumpkin here a little bit. Like he's 31% over the last month from three. Like he started off well, but if he's going to start to be something of a defensive liability and can't make threes, like they are starting to run in some trouble with what they're getting from O'Neal, which it really hasn't been much. At least Harris, yes, it's a streakiness factor, but like at least there's been some on stuff, right? Like with O'Neal, I can't even go to like having been all that on. Like it's been a month of really, really bad shooting from him, or at least well below what you can hope to like think you can survive with, right? With him on the court. If he's going to play mid 30s minutes, right? If he's going to play the mid 30s minutes and shoot 30% from three, that's going to be sort of trouble brewing territory for a guy like him. And I'm not praising Harris here. I'm just saying, like, if you look at Harris over the last month, the three-point shooting is still like 47% over the last month. So like there's
go ahead.
I can at least hang my hat. There's something to hang on here, even though tonight looked comically bad. And they were definitely managing his minutes. Like, so I was, eight first half minutes or something like that. Like they were clearly like very, very careful with what they wanted him to play coming on the back-to-back. But yeah, just in terms of the overall team performance, they got like everyone shot 25% from the field. Like you just can't win like that. It doesn't matter how good the rest of your team plays. When you can't get defensive stops on a team of, Jaden Ivey and Bojan Bogdanovic and, Killian Hayes and Sadiq Bey, like when those guys are going to be taking it to the rack every single time, just going to be trouble. So yeah, just putting a cap on the rest of the team performance, which was abysmal.
Yeah, 6 games this month where Royce O'Neal has shot 25% or less from beyond the arc. And that's significant, especially started out the month, by the way, with that 0 of 8 performance. So you always, chef's kiss. One thing I do want to talk about. So on the Detroit side of things, so the other day, obviously the trade deadline is starting to come down the pike here. The Nets feel like they're going to need to make some type of moves. The Naz Reid one, fans are on board with that. Doesn't seem like it's going to be a really high cost potentially. And you get a guy that's still young and can maybe be someone that you look at going forward with Nicholas Claxton as well. Can be a real contributor. And I like the idea of Sean Marks approaching it that way. Inside of this game, I mentioned it over on Twitter because I had thought about this player originally when we were talking about a little bit of Alex Caruso. It doesn't look like the Bulls are going that direction. How can you add something to the backcourt? Diallo for the Pistons. His on-off, when we talk about offensive, defensive net rating for that team, when he's on the court, it's 112 and 113. On 679 minutes, full beautiful sample size. When he's off the court, it's 111 and 122, minus 10 plus on 1,688 minutes. He's exactly like the kind of guy, and you saw it in this game. You know what he kind of has? He looks like Sumner, who can get at the basket a handful of times, can really throw down at the rack, a lot more athletic, a lot more jump, and a little bit bigger, a little more physical. He's 6'5". You can put him in the backcourt and ask him to do some defensive things for you that you would never want to have to ask a Joe Harris or even a Royce O'Neal at times, playing them down to smaller assignments. If we're just thinking about looking around the league at teams that have nothing to play for and an abundance of young talent, this is on the second year of his 2-year contract with Detroit, only $5 million on the books. This is a low-cost option that you can go out and acquire, and you may look across at his stats this year and say, he's a guy coming off the bench for a bad team in Detroit. I know. It kind of tells you how bad things are in Brooklyn coming off the bench, specifically in the backcourt, because you know what else happened tonight we didn't mention? Cam Thomas played 2 minutes. In a game when you needed someone to give you a spark on the offensive end to contribute, Jacque Vaughn, the coaching staff, and I'm not even knocking or questioning it. They don't feel like they can trust or rely on him in any capacity. You might as well start to put these guys into packages and bring back some other players that can have a more consistent role for you.
Man, things are getting bad when it's Hamidou Diallo time here in the at the end of the the podcast.
Think about the Patty Mills minutes you see, or the Cam Thomas couple of minutes you see, or seeing Markieff Morris gets minutes. These are across different positions, etc. But even without Kevin Durant, even with Kevin Durant, when you look down the minute shares, you're not going to tell me that Naz Reid for 20, 25 minutes a game and Diallo having him as the option. Because what you don't have right now is you don't have a guy that you say, hey, go in and give me some quality defensive backcourt minutes. It doesn't exist on the Nets roster right now. And so I think you have to try to make some of these marginal tweaks if you're looking at these sample sizes against teams like Detroit and saying, it's not just that we can't score. Remember, you gave up 130. to the Detroit Pistons. Like, there's more problems here than the fact that only 3 players had consistent offensive performances. You shouldn't be surrendering 130 with consistency to this bad of a team.
Oh, yeah, I don't disagree with you on a high level about that. I just don't think Diallo for me is the answer. Like, they'd be adding another non-floor spacer. Like, he can't shoot threes. I think that so I agree with you
And
that
that's
probably
a big downside to his
value. And
that's
honestly, for me, it's just like the biggest downside. Like, they with this team specifically, they got a couple guys that already can't space the floor. I don't think they need to personally add another guy that can't space the floor. But I agree with you. So for me, it's a no on that, but it's a yes on where there's clearly something wrong here at the and maybe look. So we got a couple of things we're going to talk about next week. So I already can tell you right now because there's too much to get into. One, we're going to talk about Simmons and the long-term like thoughts around the health, right? So we got to talk about this because it's clearly a problem. Two, we got to talk Cam Thomas because if there was going to be a game where he was going to play, to not be able to play in this one, like it raises real questions about like what the future of the team is. Maybe there was a third. I can't even remember. Those are two big ones. I guess we'll just trade deadline stuff in general. But those are the two. I think those are two like sort of pressing questions around the team leading into the trade deadline is like what you do with these situations. That one is like super tenuous when it comes to Simmons' health, and two is like you got a guy who maybe other people could see like having some value in the trade market. And if this is going to be the role for him, like there's just no role. So that's stuff we're going to
also, we're already hearing rumblings that like buyout market kind of guys getting mentioned here, which we kind of has suggested, right? We'll talk about some of them next week too. It's like, this has also been a little bit of what the approach is could probably look like. There's not a lot of bullets to fire here for Brooklyn. So we'll see what Sean Marks has to say about it.
All right. Make sure you visit sponsors LinkedIn and FanDuel. Those links are obviously in the show notes. Everyone that jumped into YouTube, I know following the losses, sometimes it can feel down. We got a bunch of people here firing in questions on YouTube. Really appreciate it. I've seen the YouTube numbers just continue to climb. It's been this steady up the mountain climb for us, and it's just amazing, and we're really, really appreciative. So if you're over on the podcast, make sure you listen to YouTube. We are going to do some YouTube live bonus stuff following the podcast. You got to hit subscribe so you get the alerts when we're going live, but you got to subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube to do that.
Happy birthday as we give the quote of the day. I don't care how I got here. In the books, when you look at it 10 or 20 years from now, it's not going to say how he got here. It's going to say he's here and he represented the team. Vin Carter.
One of the all-time great poets. I'm just going to tease something else that we're going to talk about here on YouTube. And if you get on the podcast, make sure you do it. Listen, really pretty alarming responses from Jock Vaughn having to do with Ben Simmons here. So we're going to get into this on YouTube. We'll break it down, and then we'll talk next week more about the Jock Vaughn comments having to do with Ben Simmons. We'll be back next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
And the podcast, which is going to have a little bit of spice to it. It sounds like it. They had talked about the pregame press conference from Jock Vaughn and talking about Ben Simmons. Looked like it was pretty direct. It was a very straightforward, what we need from him. It seemed like it was building towards this. There's an expectation about what has to happen with him. What did he say in the postgame?
Well, okay. So, so it depends on how you do it. So they asked him, it looks okay. So it looks like he's asked about Ben Simmons, and he says knee soreness. And it depends on how you want to look at this, because you could look at it as if he rolled his eyes and said knee soreness. You could read it as he is giving an update on information that he does not have that much of. And I'm looking at a very short clip, and this clip comes from, people that are follow the team. There's probably two. I probably misspoke a little bit here. But it's clearly like, wasn't a glowing update. It wasn't a nothing update. And also, if you wanted to look into it a certain way, because you feel a certain way, it could have looked like Vaughn was rolling his eyes and yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Nice job, Miles. You saw it too. So, and there was a little bit of an eye roll. I don't know this will be one that I would probably have to sit on a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I will say about this that okay, how am I going to phrase this? Even if there's nothing to it, which there probably isn't. Like, Vaughn's a really pretty careful dude. He's great with the press. He's not a throw under the bus guy. Like, there's nothing about this. Let's just even give it full benefit of the doubt. This clip was taken out of context, and we didn't see like the preceding 60 seconds and the following 60 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the fact that it even exists as a potential problem speaks to the problem, right? Like this is like, and so this is the problem that is going on with Simmons, just sort of in Nets world, is that there's very little positive to draw on. And when it's this easy to create narratives around the player, and look, there's a very good chance this is completely unfair to the guy. The problem is when it's this easy to create narratives around a player, it speaks to probably bigger problems because it's easy to do it, right? Yeah. And that I think is the problem. And look, there's a good chance that this is a nothing burger, but the fact that many people don't see it that way speaks to sort of what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, which is there's problems here, man. Like this is, and even if it's is an injury thing, we want him to get healthy, but it's going to be a constant injury sweat from here to the rest of the season. And that from a strictly basketball perspective and wanting the Nets to win is a huge problem. So like, even if I back out all the other stuff, it's still a problem. Even if I'm giving Ben Simmons the benefit of the doubt, which in this case I just will, it's still a problem.
Yeah, well, and by the way, like I said at the top, chicken or the egg, is it, checking out or is it an injury? And by the way, I can go on both sides when you say benefit of the doubt. We know what he was coming in with and the things that he was dealing with from a basketball standpoint and off the court. I'm not knocking if he's dealing with that sort of thing, if he's struggling to keep himself mentally locked in and engaged and et cetera, and pushing through some little injuries or some little soreness and all those things. But to your point, it's just a reality. It's just a reality of what the Nets are going to have to navigate over the back half of this season and what it's going to mean for their chances to be an effective team when it comes to the playoffs. Real quick, anybody, at Locked On Nets, if you have a question or something, explain yourself, Al Mack. I have no idea what kind of question this could possibly be. How dare you? I'll say that right now.
I don't secretly go to any games.
Yeah. So secrets out. I watch these games on my couch and take a lot of notes so we can talk about this stuff. Yeah. So I don't, and I guess it's funny too, because these two things were not related, but I said on the last episode of the podcast about how at some point, and I was having this discussion on social media a little bit around, at some point we need to back out what Ben Simmons is as a name and a commodity in the past and what he is now. And if you start treating him like a guy that has some real upside as a role bench player, then you don't care. Then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It'd be just like TJ Warren going down with could be a mild ankle injury. Okay, we've lost a potential veteran contributor off the bench. And that's where I'm trying to frame my mind with Ben Simmons, probably for my own sanity, because the longer that I hold this expectation of what he needs to be or what he can be is the longer that I get games and samples that suggest he's not going to get there. And if he's not going to get there, the Nets need to act like he's not going to get there and make decisions accordingly when it comes to this deadline.
And by the way, this isn't even us like, I'm backing out all the mental stuff, right? Like I'm saying, like, I'm willing to just again, take someone at total face value, just on an injury level. They have a huge problem with Simmons. Like, that's it. Even if you think if he's fine mentally, let's just say he is. All the quotes say he is, and he's fine and whatever. Great. That's awesome. Just strictly on an injury basis, is not going to be trusted from here to the end of the season. It can't be done. And because it's just the knees are a problem, the back's a problem, and it sucks. And I wish he was healthy. And I absolutely hate injuries. The worst part of the game. The reality of a situation is if you have an oft injured player, injuries can just kind of snowball and spiral. That's just like the nature of injury. Some guys are able to come back from it and it's fine. A lot of times these injuries tend to just cascade over the course of a career. Like you get hurt and then that's kind of can be things just start. These guys are finely tuned athletes. Everything has to work perfectly. And then when it doesn't, it can be a problem, right? It's like hard to be a professional athlete. It's like, as frankly, it's impossible to be a professional athlete. But we're entering a situation now where Simmons, even if you're pro Simmons, you can't trust the health. And so when you can't trust the health going forward, it's just going to be a real problem for what this team's ceiling can be. And I think we just have to live with that reality now. Like I know for me, when it was reported that he left the game, I was just like, yeah, here we go. This is just going to be the reality here. Like he's just going to, we'll see if he can go, can he go 10 straight games and stay healthy? I maybe spoke too soon on that. Has he gone 10 straight games with health? Regardless, it doesn't matter. It's just a problem.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
to try to figure out if he actually had, but because we said it. I mean, we were texting this even too. Like, and we've seen this during early in the season. There are these moments when it happens here. Miles Jackson, who saw the look there as well, comes in with, do you guys think they rush KD back if the team keeps sliding? No, there's no world where you could risk anything around Kevin Durant.
I think they're I think with him they'll have a very steady hand. I think if anything, it's like KD wants to come back, but I think like if anything, the Nets health staff and training staff is like an overly cautious group. Like we've seen this for years and years and years. This group is overly cautious to the point of being maddening. So I do not think that they would. I don't think they would do that.
And I get the idea. I get the question too of being like, hey, keeps going in the wrong direction. And we've seen what the record is with Kevin Durant and without him. We understand that Kevin Durant is the guy that saves this team and gives it every chance to be successful. But I tell you what, man, we talked about this coming into the injury, and we brought it up once already. Thoughts on Simmons? I saw this one. Yeah, I saw it pop up in there. Thoughts on that?
They can't trade Simmons for Crowder because the salaries don't match and whatever. But I do think Crowder. This is the other one I wanted to throw in here this is one of the guys that I forgot at the end of the podcast when I was like, oh, there's another guy that I want, like things I wanted to mention. Crowder was one of them because he is going to get traded. And I do wonder about like his fit, like his floor space, the weirdest situation with him. So I wish I could like X out the Simmons part of this one because it's impossible. Like the salaries aren't even close to each other, but Crowder is interesting. So I'm putting this up there as like more of a housekeeping thing because we'll talk about Crowder next week.
Yeah, for sure. No, and he has, to your point about what the two very different players and done very different things in the league in terms of what his skill set is, complementary in terms of being a 3-and-D kind of guy that the Nets could utilize. Yeah, here you go. What about what do you think, Doug? Oh,
they don't have enough.
You know what?
Like 2 first-round picks. It's going to go for like 2 first-round picks. Like he's like, they don't have anything close to enough for OG.
Well, this is what I found interesting, just in NBA, just over in the NBA general spectrum. Over the last week and a half to 2 weeks, you've heard like, okay, maybe OG is going to be on the market, maybe this player, maybe that player, and over a couple of week stretch, it's like, here's the asking price. Well, or maybe here's the asking price, but maybe here's the asking. Like there's a very like sliding scale that's going on around all these players. There was a point when OG was getting talked about being available for not multiple 2 and 3 first round picks. Now it's up there where we all thought the value would be, but I find it fascinating to like follow that trend around the league because I think it's just very much like gauging interest and what kind of package you can get and drumming up interest. That's why the Nas Reed one, when you hear like 2nd round pick in a player, yeah, that's a feasible thing that the Nets could go do. Probably we'll talk about next week. Crowder is a feasible one because they specifically had him sitting on the sidelines until they can find somewhere that they can move him to.
Man, you know what? I had another good one here, and I'm just going to give... Oh, here we go. Oh, no. This wasn't the first person that said it, and I apologize. I will say, if you're talking about like offseason moves that don't make sense, someone else put this in here, and I feel big a fortune. Thank you for putting this back in here. But someone else, I think, was the original person that said it. I'm going to take 6 seconds and scroll to see if I can find it.
I'm looking through for it.
Okay, doesn't matter. I will say this is something that's gone untalked about here. Like they signed Patty Mills for 2 seasons at $6.5 million, $6.5 million for this year and 6.8 for next year. Denver signed Bruce Brown for like the exact same amount, like literally the exact like to the dollar amount. Yep. Patty, and I guess we probably haven't spent enough time talking about this season about how awful this move is in retrospect. Like
we talked about early in the year because it was once we saw that Patty wasn't playing at all effectively. Yeah. It became hey, you could have had Royce. Well, you brought in Royce O'Neal. We talked about how not the same as Bruce Brown, does some different things, etc. But then we came to the reality of, oh, you could have just had Bruce Brown and Royce O'Neal, and how much better would this team look right now?
And they were doing right by Patty or something like that. And I'm not really sure, but the fact that the numbers are the same, like this one was bad at the time, but I probably even didn't realize how bad it was. And now it looks so bad. This is actually like criminally bad that these guys are the same amount, and Patty is a complete dustball, and Bruce Brown is playing better in Denver than he did on Brooklyn. Like it's pretty brutal, man.
Well, it's crazy that I mean, not crazy, but like think about the idea of like, what do you lack right now? And Bruce Brown was never the total solve, but Bruce Brown was playing
shooting 40% from 3. He's shooting 40%. He kept the 3-point shooting.
Sure, he did.
He kept the 3-point shooting. I knew he did. I just hadn't looked at this in a while. Like he kept the 3-point shooting on higher volume. And like,
I had some, I will say that I had some sense, and this isn't like trying to put rose-colored glasses on it. There seemed to be some sense that like Bruce Brown was going to leave. Like, it wasn't a discussion about re-signing him. It didn't seem like, you know what I mean? You didn't hear.
I think he said he didn't get any off. I'm pretty sure he said they didn't even offer him. I don't think that was the case. I think he said he wanted to stay and they didn't offer him anything.
I remember him. Yeah, I remember him saying that. And I do wonder, like, I'd love to know about. He said they didn't make him an offer. You're correct. And it's like, okay, but and I don't like, you know what I mean? And the old player, and you're going to the market, you're trying to find a landing spot. Now, again, he effectively went and signed a contract. It didn't seem like he had a lot of suitors out there anyway. So, I mean, it's still puzzling. And even if you had to, quote, overpay to keep him, I would have done that. It turns out you didn't need to do that. And to your point, now you have another guy on the roster. If you think about him, and Seth Curry is a far different player. But when we talk about what the Nets lack, some defense in certain areas, and a guy like Bruce Brown, you can now look at Joe Harris with $18 million, obviously, and then you can combine the $8+ million with Seth Curry, the $6+ million with Patty Mills. You have these three players, as bad as the 30+ on Ben Simmons is looking right now. You also have three players that are up over, that are right around 30 million combined. And effectively, you have what? 1.5 players on your roster for that? 1.25 at times? I mean, it's been pretty brutal. And the injuries for Harris and for Curry come in, play a big factor in that. It is fascinating. And Bruce Brown is in his mid-20s when you think about like keeping a guy that you could have kept around for the short and long term, and feels like he fits really well around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
I'm tilted by this Brown thing. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. I mean, it's like clearly this is not like this isn't news for me. I just kind of had like dismissed it as a thing. And I just
always good to bury this stuff.
And I hadn't thought about these two guys comparatively. And now I'm just like, I was already tilted after this game, and now I'm so tilted. Yeah. We're going to get out of here anyway, but because I didn't post this podcast, but you got one more. We can throw it up here. Otherwise, we're gonna get out of here. I'm in a terrible mood because of this Bruce Brown thing now.
No, we're all good. Next week, as you said, Doug, the Jay Crowder, we'll talk about his contract, how things can line up there, some of the options the Nets are going to have here. And based on all the stuff we just talked about and the contract given to Patty Mills, like Sean Marks, he made a lot of good decisions this offseason. We agreed with that. And also, it's incomplete until you do something else here. Because even with Kevin Durant back, the state of Ben Simmons demands that you do something to significantly change the way this team can operate on a night in, night out basis. We'll come back in. We'll let everybody know that Hooper's Breakdown thinks we did a great show. Thank you, sir. And we'll come back in next week talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.